Welcome to The Karma Verdict. Let us get started with today's story. My fiancée told me the wedding was off unless I apologized to her ex. My reply was simple. Then the wedding is off. She did not seem to take me seriously until the venue coordinator called her to confirm that our contract was officially terminated. My name is Jackson. I am 32 years old and work in IT support for a mid-size logistics company. My life is rooted in the suburbs of Columbus with a predictable rhythm of commuting, hitting the gym, and settling in for the night. My fiancée Ava is 29 and manages a dental office. We have been together for 3 years and engaged for 6 months. We decided not to move in together until after the wedding, agreeing to merge our lives and our leases in one go. Until last month, I would have described our relationship as solid. It was not perfect, but our problems were the normal kind adults face. We dealt with coordinating schedules, budgeting, and navigating family boundaries, which are things you work through with shared calendars and honest conversations. Ava has an ex-boyfriend named Liam. They had an on-again, off-again relationship before we met, and she told me it ended because he was immature and could not commit. That seemed reasonable, as I have a past too. The key difference is that I do not let my past bleed into my present. Liam, however, always seemed to be hovering on the periphery of her life through mutual friends, random group hangouts, and the occasional text message she insisted was completely harmless. I was never thrilled about his presence, but I also did not want to be the controlling boyfriend who dictates who his partner can or cannot be friends with. So, I set a simple, clear boundary. I had zero desire for him to be involved in our wedding in any capacity. That should have been straightforward, but then Ava began planning the wedding with the intensity of a military strategist, and I was cast as the unpaid, unconsulted intern. Every decision was presented with a certain finality. If I questioned a choice, she acted as though I was deliberately obstructing her progress. If I disagreed, she would deploy the silent treatment followed by hours of cold, one-word answers. A couple of weeks ago, she dropped the news that Liam was coming to the wedding. He was not my guest or even her plus one. She explained that he had introduced her to one of the vendors years ago, so it would be rude not to invite him. The logic was baffling, but she stated it as if it were an undeniable fact, and I was just being difficult. I told her, "No. Let me be perfectly clear. No drama." I added, "I am not getting married with your ex-boyfriend sitting in the audience watching it happen." She rolled her eyes and called me insecure. Then she delivered the line that made my stomach clench. She said the wedding was canceled unless I apologized to Liam for disrespecting him. I was sure she was bluffing. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Okay. Then the wedding is canceled." I meant every word. She just laughed as if I had told a bad joke, grabbed her keys, and walked out. The last text she sent me that night was a prediction that I would come crawling back once I realized how much money we had already put down in deposits. I did not crawl. I started making phone calls. The next morning, the first call I made was to the venue. I did not raise my voice or make a dramatic scene. I simply inquired about their cancellation policy and the necessary steps to formally terminate our agreement. The coordinator informed me that while both of our names were on the contract, either one of us could request the cancellation. A financial penalty would apply based on how close we were to the event date. I asked her to email me the necessary form. While I waited for the email, I called the caterer and the photographer. I used the same calm tone and asked the same direct questions. I was being pragmatic. If our wedding was contingent on me apologizing to her ex, it was not a wedding I was willing to fund. Around noon, Ava texted me a screenshot of an Airbnb confirmation for our honeymoon. The caption read, "I hope you are proud of yourself. This is non-refundable." I replied that I was handling the venue cancellation and that we could split any legally binding losses down the middle. I kept my tone neutral, avoiding any insults or accusations. She called me, almost immediately. The first words out of her mouth were, "Are you seriously trying to humiliate me?" That word, humiliate, stood out. I told her, "I will not apologize to a man who has no place at our wedding." I followed up by saying, "If you genuinely believe our marriage should depend on that, then canceling is the only logical step." Her strategy shifted instantly. Suddenly, the issue was not Liam anymore. It was about me not respecting her judgment. She claimed I was forcing her to choose sides and that healthy adults do not issue ultimatums. I calmly reminded her that she was the one who had issued the ultimatum. She told me to apologize to Liam or the wedding was off. I had simply accepted her terms. A long pause hung in the air. Finally, she said, "You are overreacting. I did not mean it was literally canceled. That was the first sign of a crack in her resolve. I asked her directly if Liam was coming to the wedding. She hesitated before saying he would only come if I could be mature about it. That told me everything I needed to know. I submitted the cancellation form that afternoon. It was not an impulsive act. I had read the contract twice. The deposit we stood to lose was significant but not financially ruinous. I could absorb my half of the loss without wrecking my savings. It would sting, but not nearly as much as entering a marriage where my core boundaries were up for negotiation based on her mood. 3 days later, the venue sent a confirmation email to both of us, acknowledging receipt of the cancellation request and asking Ava to provide her confirmation. That is when the reality of the situation hit her. She appeared at my apartment that evening unannounced. The laughter was gone. It was nearly 9 p.m. when she knocked. I had already eaten dinner and was catching up on work emails. My first instinct was to ignore it, but I knew avoiding her would only prolong the inevitable. She walked in as if she still had a key, dropped her purse on my kitchen counter, and immediately launched her offensive. She accused me of blindsiding her, calling my decision to cancel without further discussion extreme. She said I had made her look unhinged to the venue coordinator. The issue, she insisted, was about trust, not Liam. According to her, if I truly trusted her, I would not feel threatened by a man she dated years ago. She kept repeating that he was an important part of her personal growth, and that cutting him out completely would be immature. I told her I did not feel threatened. I simply refused to begin my marriage by celebrating in front of her ex, just so she could maintain appearances. She snapped back, calling me a tyrant. Then she said something that changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. She told me that Liam felt offended by the way I had spoken about him. I asked her when, exactly, I had spoken to Liam about any of this. After another brief hesitation, she confessed. She had shown him screenshots of our private text exchange about the wedding guest list. Her justification was that she wanted his perspective because he knew her so well. That was the moment of true clarity for me, a feeling that replaced all the frustration. This was never just about an ex being on a guest list. This was about triangulation. She was filtering our relationship conflicts through him, and then expecting me to apologize for having an opinion about my own wedding. I told her that sharing our private conversations with an ex-boyfriend crossed a boundary that was completely unacceptable to me. She shrugged it off, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing. In her view, I should be grateful she had friends who cared enough to offer their input. Friends, that word again. I asked her directly if she was still emotionally attached to him. Her anger flared instantly. She said it was a disgusting thing to imply, and that if she wanted to be with Liam, she would not be engaged to me. The answer felt hollow, as if it had been rehearsed. I kept my voice even. I told her that was precisely why I had canceled everything. Instead of respecting a simple boundary, she had escalated the situation by involving the one person guaranteed to destabilize our relationship. She looked at me with an expression of pure betrayal. Then she said something that I truly did not expect. She said that if I would retract the cancellation and apologize to Liam, she would forgive me for humiliating her. Forgive me? That was when I understood this was not a misunderstanding at all. It was a power play, and she was still operating under the assumption that I would eventually fold. Her offer to forgive me landed with a thud. It was not a dramatic or explosive moment. It was just profoundly wrong in a quiet and final way. I glanced around my apartment, looking at my couch, my kitchen, and this space that I pay for and maintain. Then I looked back at her and realized she was still talking, still framing this as a negotiation where she held all the cards. I told her we were done for the night and that she needed to leave. She blinked as if her brain could not process the words. I repeated it calmly. This conversation is over. You need to go home now. She crossed her arms defiant. Adults do not run away when things get uncomfortable, she said. The irony was staggering. I did not engage in the debate. I walked over to the front door and opened it. She just stood there staring at me, waiting for me to soften, waiting for me to apologize for enforcing a boundary in my own home. I said, "This is my apartment. You are a guest here. I am asking you to leave." Her voice sharpened. She accused me of trying to intimidate her, calling it psychological abuse. She claimed that canceling the wedding and now throwing her out proved I was unstable. I remained calm. There is nothing unstable about asking someone to leave your home when they are disrespecting you, I replied. She picked up her purse but made no move toward the door. Instead, she tried one last tactic. If you make me leave, we are really over. It was her second power test of the night. I met her gaze and said, yes. If that is what it takes for you to understand that I am serious, then yes. She stared at me for a long moment, searching for any sign of weakness. When she found none, she walked past me and into the hallway. Before she left, she turned back and said, "You are going to regret this when you realize you ruined a wedding over your ego." I replied, "I am not ruining a wedding. I am refusing to start one this way." Then I closed the door. I locked it, not with a dramatic flourish, but with a simple mechanical click. I stood there for a minute, just to be sure she was gone and not waiting outside for me to have a change of heart. 10 minutes later, a text arrived. It was a long, rambling message about my coldness, about her parents' disappointment, and about what everyone was going to say. Not a single word acknowledged my boundary. That is when a profound sense of calm washed over me. Because if asking her to leave my apartment brought me a feeling of relief instead of panic, that told me everything I needed to know. Throughout the rest of the evening, the messages did not stop. First came the anger, then the guilt-tripping. She said I had humiliated her in front of the venue coordinator. She said her mother was asking difficult questions. She said people would assume she had done something awful to deserve this. I noticed a pattern. Every text was about her public image, her embarrassment, and her inconvenience. Not once did she express any understanding of why I was uncomfortable with Liam's involvement in our relationship. Around midnight, she called 3 times in a row. I let each call go to voicemail. I refused to be drawn into another circular conversation where my boundaries were reframed as acts of aggression. The next morning, new messages were waiting. Her tone had shifted. She was calmer and more strategic. She wrote that we needed to fix this before it spiraled out of control. She suggested meeting for coffee to talk like adults. She also added that Liam thought the whole situation was a misunderstanding and that he was willing to accept my apology in private to make things easier. That was the sentence that sealed it for me. The fact that Liam knew enough about our ongoing conflict to have an opinion meant she was still feeding him real-time updates. Our relationship had become a topic for their group chat. I replied only once. I wrote, "I will not apologize to him, and I will not continue a relationship where my fiancée prioritizes her ex over basic boundaries. I wish you the best." She immediately shot back that I was creating more drama and that blocking her would prove I never truly loved her. I did not argue. I offered no further explanation. I blocked her number. Then, I blocked her on all social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, and even LinkedIn, because I know how these things play out. I wanted to shut down any avenue for indirect messages, public posts aimed at me, or mutual friends being used as intermediaries. This was not an act of anger. It was a strategic move. Leaving any channel of communication open would have been an invitation for her to drag me back into a debate, and debating was her specialty. She excelled in the gray areas where she could twist and reframe an issue until I was defending my own character instead of addressing the original problem. Blocking her was not about punishment. It was about ending the cycle cleanly. An hour later, my phone rang with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from Liam. I stared at the notification for a full minute before I could bring myself to listen. His voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. He said he heard things had escalated and that he did not want to be the cause of a failed wedding. He claimed he respected me and hoped we could talk it out man to man. That specific phrasing made it clear his involvement was no accident. He felt entitled to intervene. He went on to say that Ava was incredibly upset and that she tended to react emotionally when she felt cornered. He was positioning himself as the calm, rational mediator. I did not call him back. Instead, I saved the voicemail and took a screenshot of the call log. Not because I intended to use it, but because in situations like this, documentation is important when narratives start to diverge. About an hour after that, my sister texted me asking what was going on. Ava had apparently called her crying, claiming I had abruptly canceled the wedding over a minor disagreement about the guest list, and then blocked her without any explanation. Things were escalating fast. I called my sister back and gave her the condensed, fact-based version. Ava invited her ex against my wishes, shared our private arguments with him, and then made our wedding conditional on me apologizing to him. I simply accepted her condition. My sister was silent for a moment before saying, "That does not sound like a minor disagreement." By mid-afternoon, Ava tried to reach me via email. The subject line read, "Please, just listen." I read the message. It was the same argument dressed in new clothes. She felt attacked and unsupported. Liam was only trying to help. Blocking her was cruel and immature. She also subtly mentioned that canceling the venue without her explicit consent could have legal consequences for me if she chose to sue for damages. That part caught my attention. This was not because I was worried, as the contract explicitly stated either party could initiate the cancellation, but because it showed her mindset. This was no longer about reconciliation. It was about applying pressure. Later that evening, Liam sent another text, this time from a different number. It read, "Avoiding this conversation just makes you look guilty." I blocked that number too. The pattern was undeniable. Ava was not trying to privately mend our relationship. She was publicly building a narrative in which I was the unstable and unreasonable one, and Liam was not a passive bystander. He was an active participant. It confirmed something I had been hesitant to admit to myself. This was never just about a wedding guest. The real issue was whether I was willing to spend my marriage competing with her ex for influence over my own relationship. The next 2 days were quiet on my end because I had closed all the doors she was trying to use, but the fallout continued. A mutual friend, Kevin, messaged me to ask if I was okay. He said Ava had told their group chat that I had a serious jealousy problem and had sabotaged the wedding after freaking out over nothing. In her version of the story, Liam was invited as a simple courtesy, and I had reacted as if she had been unfaithful. I called Kevin instead of texting him back. I laid out the timeline for him in simple, unemotional terms. She invited her ex. I said no. She made the wedding conditional on me apologizing to him. I accepted her terms. She involved him in our private conflicts. I ended the relationship. Kevin was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Yeah, that is not how she framed it." Of course not. That afternoon, I received an email from Ava's mother. It was polite but direct. She said that marriage required compromise, and that pride should not be allowed to ruin our future together. That word again, pride. I replied respectfully, stating that this was not about pride, but about boundaries and trust. I told her I was not comfortable marrying someone who involved an ex-boyfriend in our conflicts, and made my participation conditional on appeasing him. She never wrote back. Later that evening, Ava showed up at my apartment building again. I only knew because my downstairs neighbor texted me that someone was buzzing every unit on the intercom system. I did not answer. I had already made it clear she was no longer welcome. Instead, she sent one final email. It was longer than the others, less angry and more calculated. She said she was willing to uninvite Liam if that is what it would take to move forward, but she needed reassurance that I would never humiliate her like that again. She also requested that I apologize to her for overreacting and for canceling the venue without giving her a chance to cool down. There it was. She would remove Liam from the guest list, but only if I admitted I was the one in the wrong for standing my ground. I read the email twice to be certain I was not misinterpreting her words. It was not an apology. It was a transaction. And in that moment, I realized something disturbing but essential. If I agreed to this, I would be setting a precedent for the rest of our lives. Every time she crossed a line and I pushed back, I would ultimately be the one to take the blame just to restore the peace. That is not a partnership. It is a training exercise. I did not reply to negotiate. I forwarded the email to my personal archive to keep a record. Then I contacted the venue one last time to confirm that the cancellation was finalized and that our file was officially closed. They confirmed it. There was no going back now, administratively or personally. The following week was quieter, at least on the surface. Ava stopped trying to contact me directly. Instead, the stories began to trickle back to me through the grapevine. One of her coworkers told a mutual acquaintance that I had gotten cold feet. Someone else heard that I was deeply insecure about her past and could not handle being with a woman who had more life experience. It was fascinating how consistent the narrative was. In every version, I was portrayed as fragile, overwhelmed, or threatened. Not one story mentioned her demand that I apologize to her ex as a condition for getting married. I never responded publicly. I did not write a social media post or try to correct the story in every social circle. That is a battle you cannot win. People will believe what they want to believe. Instead, I focused on the practicalities. We had a pending application for a new apartment we planned to move into after the wedding. I called the property manager and formally withdrew my name from the application, requesting written confirmation that I was no longer associated with it. I did not want my name tied to anything she could use. I also went over all the vendor contracts one last time, ensuring my financial liability was contained. Losing the deposits was a real financial hit, but it was manageable. I paid my half of the penalties immediately and saved all the receipts. Around that time, one last unexpected thing happened. Liam emailed me directly. This time, it was not from a strange number or an anonymous account. It was from his official work address. He wrote that he felt obligated to step in because Ava was spiraling and felt consumed by guilt. He said he never intended to cause trouble, and that he respected my position as her future husband. Future husband? The phrase was either completely tone-deaf or deliberately pointed. He added that if I wanted to meet for coffee to clear the air, he was open to it. He emphasized that mature men communicate instead of shutting people out. I read the email very carefully. At no point did he acknowledge the inappropriateness of inserting himself into our conflict. There was no admission that receiving screenshots of our private arguments had crossed a line. It was just a gentle implication that I was the one who needed to grow up. That was the final confirmation I needed. I understood a simple truth. If I married Ava, Liam would never fade into the background. He would remain a permanent consultant in our disagreements, a silent vote in our marriage. And Ava would continue to frame that dynamic as something completely reasonable. So, I replied to him just once. I wrote, "There is no misunderstanding. It is not your place to mediate this relationship. Do not contact me again." Then I blocked his email address. That night, for the first time since this ordeal began, my phone was completely silent, and that silence felt incredibly healthy. About a week after the silence finally set in, I ran into Ava at a grocery store near my apartment. It was completely unplanned, just a case of bad timing. She saw me first. I knew because she froze in the middle of the aisle, then her posture straightened as if she were preparing for a performance. My first instinct was to turn and walk away, but I decided I had nothing to hide from. We met face to face near the dairy section. She looked different. She was not devastated or remorseful, but completely composed. She said hi in the same casual tone you would use with a coworker you had not seen in a few days. I nodded and said hello back. An awkward silence followed, one she clearly expected me to break. When I did not, she did. She told me she wished I had handled things differently. She said that canceling so publicly instead of dealing with the issue privately had hurt her deeply. She emphasized the word publicly as if I had taken out a billboard ad instead of just contacting the necessary vendors. I replied that I had handled it privately, and that the vendors were a part of the wedding's private logistics. They needed accurate information. She sighed. "You know what I mean?" she said. Then she said something that solidified my decision completely. "Liam agrees that we both escalated things and that with better communication, this whole mess could have been avoided." There it was again. Liam, the referee. Liam, the judge of our relationship. I asked her one final question. If we could go back to that night and I told you I was not going to apologize, would you have respected that decision without imposing any consequences? She hesitated. It was not a long pause, but it was long enough. She said, "I just needed you to show me that you could put my feelings before your own." That answer was both honest and deeply revealing. In her mind, putting her feelings first meant my own boundaries had to come second. It meant my discomfort was less important than her comfort with her ex. I told her calmly that I was not interested in a relationship built on that foundation. She looked annoyed rather than sad. She seemed annoyed, as if I were being stubborn for no good reason. "I guess that is it then," she said. I replied, "Yes, that is it." We stood there for another silent moment before she grabbed her shopping basket and walked away without looking back. I felt neither anger nor regret. I just felt a quiet sense of validation. Because even at the very end, she framed the problem as my failure to prioritize her feelings, not her failure to protect our relationship from an outside influence. And that difference is not a minor detail. It is everything. It has now been 3 months since the wedding was officially canceled. The financial side is completely settled. We split the non-refundable deposits according to the contracts we both signed. There were no lawsuits or dramatic legal battles, just paperwork and electronic receipts. The social narrative has also died down. The people who wanted to believe I panicked still believe it. The people who asked for my side of the story heard it and made up their own minds. I have stopped trying to justify my actions. Ava and I have not spoken since that day in the grocery store. A mutual friend recently mentioned that she and Liam are spending a lot of time together again. I did not ask for any more details. It is no longer my business. If anything, it just confirms the gut feeling I had when she insisted he be at our wedding. Looking back, the initial trigger seems so small on paper. It was a guest list invitation, a demanded apology, and a compromise that was not won. But the mechanism behind it was anything but small. She invited her ex into our private conflict. She valued his opinion on our engagement. She treated me as if I needed to get the approval of a man who had no place in my future. And when I refused to play along, she did not reconsider her position. She just escalated her tactics. The thing that stands out most to me is not the argument itself, but how quickly she moved to control the narrative once I disobeyed, by calling my sister, texting our friends, and painting me as unstable. That was not the behavior of someone in a panic. It was calculated damage control. If I had apologized to Liam, the wedding would have gone forward. On the surface, everything would have looked perfect. The photos, the smiles, and the celebratory speeches would have been flawless. But I would have known that when it truly mattered, my boundaries were negotiable, and her ex had a say in our life together. That knowledge would not have faded away after the honeymoon. People still ask me if I regret being so firm. The honest answer is no. Canceling a wedding is expensive, and it creates a lot of awkward conversations. But divorcing someone who does not respect your fundamental boundaries is infinitely worse. I did not lose a marriage. I dodged one that was set up against me from the start. And the fact that she did not believe I was serious until the venue itself confirmed the cancellation tells me everything I need to know about how she saw my resolve. She thought I was bluffing. I was not. Comment. I want to take a moment to talk about the quiet strength it takes to walk away from situations that no longer serve your peace. You might find yourself in moments where people test your limits and expect you to compromise your core values just to keep things comfortable. True partnership requires mutual respect, and it is never selfish to protect your mental health when that respect is missing. Walking away is incredibly hard, but it is often the first vital step toward healing and creating a life rooted in truth. You can be a kind and loving person while still drawing a firm line when someone repeatedly disregards your feelings. Choosing yourself might feel like losing a part of your future, but it actually opens the door to relationships where you are truly valued. Taking responsibility for your own happiness means having the courage to face temporary discomfort instead of accepting a lifetime of quiet resentment. I hope you always remember that your boundaries are valid and that your peace of mind is worth protecting. Please share your own experiences with setting healthy boundaries in the comments below, as your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. I appreciate having you in this community, and I look forward to reading your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our upcoming stories. Your support means the world to us.